In my previous episode, I shared some of my secrets to growing tomatoes and showed how well one of my tomato beds was faring. You may want to check that out before continuing watching. I wanted to share more of my secrets to growing tomatoes in this video. I had planted 2 tomato beds previously about 2 weeks apart from one another. The first batch had established themselves extremely well, putting out large leaves and plenty of blooms and had set large fruit already. The second batch suffered the setback of some unknown critter attacking them when they were plantlets. They did eventually manage to regrow, albeit not with the same strength at first. At this point, the first bed needed to be supported since the tomatoes had outgrown their original smaller twig towers. I wanted to use the natural materials I had at hand to jerry-rig a solution. In the past, I have shown other ways I have tried to secure tomatoes. Some people swear by using the string trellis system to grow tomatoes, training them and pinching side shoots to maximize fruit set. That is a system even used by commercial hothouses, so it works. It just demands lots of maintenance and looks rather industrial. I've also shared in my first season a method of using garden netting in horizontal layers held by poles to create a self-trellising support that still is very practical and maintenance-free. It is just not the most beautiful for a front garden. In this new garden, I wanted to keep things on the natural or ornamental side, so putting together a rough twig tower to have the bushy plant fill it over seemed right. One of my favorite secrets to beautify a tomato plant is to interplant zinnias next to it. I even made a video that's linked in the cards. Both plants work well together, but this year I did not have time to start zinnias and ended up not adding the beautiful blooms. However, a good tip I followed this time was to space my tomato plants farther apart. I had the tendency to crowd plants together in my former cramped garden, but with the extra leg room in this one I could be more generous. Spacing the plants about 2 feet from each other gave them more room and energy to grow, and one very healthy plant was growing more tomatoes than several cramped plants. I certainly was learning with this. Now, I do doubt that this structure is going to last for more than a season, if that. But I'm not worried. I just wanted to do its job for now, just to support the tomatoes. And if it does that, that's all I ask for it. It also just took me a few minutes to put together, so I can't complain. But to tell you the truth, I do like the way it looked. It's a nice counterpoint against these almost baroque, more formal structures, and you have this wilder, kind of bushy, crazier, natural structure. I think it ties in, makes the space more interesting to look at, and as the tomatoes grow, it will cover them more and more. So that's why I'm going to be tying the tomatoes I see that are getting out of the central structure into it, using the bark rope I have here. Nothing fancy. Whatever you have at your disposal, especially if for free, is the best option for you to use. Just be creative and sustainable. And overall, I do prefer to take a more hands-off approach when dealing with tomatoes. Not because you can't get good results pampering your tomatoes and pruning them and doing all that kind of stuff. I believe you can, but I don't have time for that, so I do the least I can to get as much yield as possible. And I've noticed that just letting them be provides me enough of a harvest. I'm not a commercial grower, I'm just growing for myself, so it doesn't matter that it yields tremendously, because while I can try to freeze it, and I usually do, if I get too many tomatoes, that can be a problem. But all in all, I think it's just a matter of a bit of maintenance, not too much, but mostly after you plant, you just harvest. You have to keep track that the tomatoes are ripening and that you have to go there before even any other animal might go and tries to eat it. Another secret for success was choosing the right locally adapted variety to grow. This tomato was a black brandywine variety bought from Baker Creek Seeds that was an heirloom from neighboring Pennsylvania. It most likely had better adapted to this climate and condition, and it showed. If you can, try to find local heirlooms to grow where you live. In time, you can also start to select your own varieties so that they get accustomed to your local microclimate. That, of course, takes patience and several seasons growing tomatoes. If you select the best, most disease-resistant specimens each year, you create your own locally adapted strain. I'll be back right after this commercial. A few days later, after tying up my successful first batch of tomatoes, I noticed that the plants on the second bed was yearning to be set free from the protective cloche. It had suffered a setback early on from some animal attacking its growing tips, but because I had planted the more stressed out fragile seedlings sideways to develop better root systems, after they got well established in their new home, they were beginning to send out vigorous shoots, ready to grow, flower, and set seed. Tomatoes are resilient plants and can take a bit of abuse. As long as you have them planted in rich, moist, but well-draining soil and the weather is sunny but around 80 degrees, tomatoes will thrive. Cold and damp weather, on the other hand, can spell doom. This is part of the reason why growing tomatoes out in the open without the aid of a hoop house in cool England can be such a hassle. In such a climate, they don't grow well and are at the mercy of wilts and other fungal diseases. In the right places, they grow wild. A secret I have to prevent wilt and other diseases, besides using a layer of mulch, is to never water tomatoes by wetting their leaves. I try to water them only if necessary, instead relying on mulch to trap the moisture from regular rain near the roots. In just a couple of weeks, even these weaker tomato vines were starting to catch up, setting fruit. But if your weather is hot and dry, they do benefit from irrigation. Just never hose them down, wetting their leaves. Instead, direct the water right into the soil near the roots. Your tomatoes will thank you. The risk of disease is already elevated by natural rain. You don't have to increase the risk by unnecessarily watering leaves. The first tomato plants had taken to their new support as several fruits hung in clusters. I had planted some basil next to them and they were starting to grow. I would begin harvesting them any day now, as soon as they turned color. We're right in the middle of a most oppressive heat wave. As the climate's changing, we've been having more extreme weather, and it seems to be happening one after the other. We had a lot of rain, and now it's going to be upwards of 100 degrees today with temperatures that feel like 115, and that's very unusual for this area in Maryland. But there is a silver lining, and that is that today I'm harvesting my first tomatoes, and I've already took a sneak peek and they look amazing. I am really happy to see that it worked, that the tomato plants look as healthy as ever. I hope they keep up like this for the rest of the season. But for now, it's time to just enjoy what I have while I have to deal with the weather. Tomatoes like warm weather, but if temperatures rise too much, it can cause them to slow down their growth and stop producing new fruit. The optimal temperature for fruit set is around 80 degrees. That is when the plant pumps out blooms to be pollinated by insects. When the temperature goes over 95 degrees, tomatoes can stop growing as fast, and you may experience vines starting to yellow out and drop leaves by mid to late summer. That is when giving tomatoes a bit more water may be needed if the soil is starting to get dry. Dry soil and irregular watering may cause the plants to develop blossom and rot, which is when, as the name states, the blossom end of the fruit starts turning brown before they mature. This is caused either by calcium deficiency in the soil, but more often by lack of water and irregular watering, which interferes with calcium absorption. Remember to keep the soil moist, but not waterlogged. My tomatoes sure look promising. The ones I was harvesting look delicious, since there is nothing quite as flavorful as vine-ripened heirloom tomatoes. There were several green fruits still developing in the vine, showing the best harvest days were yet to come. I decided to harvest the tomatoes still turning red, since sometimes bugs and animals decide to attack them as they ripen, and they will still develop a good flavor if they just finish ripening inside. Of course, the best ones are the ones that hang on the vines the longest. Despite the high temperatures, my vines didn't seem affected. Perhaps it was because they were near the retaining wall, slightly wetter soil around it. That would relieve them of any additional stress. I also knew that if the plant was kept healthy and stress-free as the temperatures would start to drop, closer to fall, more fruit would set and the harvest would be stellar. But judging from the first fruits, this was a success.